Your Royal Highness, the Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here to share with you the perspective of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in the face of growing challenges of living within the planetary boundaries. The year 2015 was a landmark year in the global environmental agenda. The world agreed the Sustainable Development Goals and then came together at the 21st Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to reach an ambitious agreement on tackling climate change. This week in Rome, we are exploring ways in which forest and sustainable forest management can contribute to these global objectives. Today, I would like to concentrate on the Paris Agreement and the challenge for the implementation. In particular, I'd like to look at how the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is supporting government's effort to turn climate action into reality and the role of agriculture and forests in that work. For our treatment of forests holds one of the keys to tackling climate change. Among the many precious ecosystem services that the world's forests can offer us are sinks for carbon emissions. If we exploit or clear forests irresponsibly, we certainly exacerbate global warming. We can use trees to absorb carbon, but there are limits to afforestation. We need to land grow food as well. In Paris, nations set themselves the ambitious goal of holding global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and pursuing efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees. That goal will be reached not through top-down targets, but by nationally determined contributions set by each country. Parties to the convention will regularly monitor progress towards the goal and consider whether their contributions need to be ratcheted up, with a facilitative dialogue in 2018 and a first global stocktake in 2023 and every 5 years thereafter. That agreement reflects the findings of the IPCC assessment. Future IPCC reports will feed into the global stocktake process, and our work plan will be aligned with it. The main findings of our last assessment, the 5th assessment report, are: first, human activity is disrupting our climate. Second, the more we disrupt our climate, the more we risk severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts. However, we can make the choice to limit climate change and build a more prosperous world. Specifically, on the subjects we are discussing this week, we found that in 2010, agriculture, forest, and other land uses, or known as AFOLU in the climate change terminology, accounted for 24% of greenhouse gas emissions, second biggest contributor after energy. And yet, while overall emissions growth accelerated in the first decade of this century at 2.2% per year, which is double the trend rate, that was due to growth in all other sectors, not FOLU, reflecting a slowdown in deforestation at that time. Mitigation strategies consistent with a likely, that is, 2/3 or more, chance of keeping warming below 2 degrees by the end of this century typically involve a temporary overshoot in concentrations of greenhouse gases. These scenarios then involve negative emissions, often relying on the availability of bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or known as BECCS, and afforestation in the second half of this century. However, the availability and scale of these technologies is very uncertain at this moment. These and other uncertainties will be examined in the next set of our assessments. We will start preparations of the 6th assessment report later this year, finishing in year 2022 in time for the first global stocktake in 2023. In the meantime, we will update in 2019 methodologies by which countries measure and report their greenhouse gas emissions and removals, and produce 3 special reports. The first one is on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees of pre-industrial levels and related global greenhouse gas emissions pathways. The second special report is on climate change, desertification, land degradation, sustainable land management, food security, and greenhouse gas fluxes and terrestrial ecosystems. This will be available in 2019. And third special report that is on climate change and oceans and the cryosphere also will be available in 2019. Each of these is highly relevant to this community. Our report on 1.5 degrees requested by the COP21 in Paris will increase our knowledge on the impact of ecosystems of holding warming to 1.5 degrees. At the time we produced our last assessment, AL5, there was relatively little scientific literature available on this for us to assess. And the sections on emissions pathways will consider the methods and technologies, including BECCS, BECCS, and afforestation, which might take us to that goal. The topics of land use report speak for themselves, and the report on oceans will have implications for fisheries and management and health of the maritime ecosystem services, among others. Reflecting the fact that we are now in the implementation phase of dealing with climate change, all of these reports will put a greater emphasis on solutions. At the same time, we need to close information gaps on the impact of climate change at the local and regional levels. The area of research of interest to this community that we will need to examine include work on negative emissions such as biomass combustion with CCS, biochar and biomass burial, ocean geoengineering, and solar radiation management. For the assessment report on land use issues, we need modeling of the potential location and scale of desertification and land degradation due to climate change. And we need to understand the increasingly complex dynamic interrelationships between climate, food production, and human security, including the potential for adaptation and impacts on migration. Before closing my remarks, let me highlight that failure to take action on climate change poses high risk of abrupt and irreversible regional scale changes in the composition, structure, and function of the terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems, leading to substantial additional climate change. Linkages among water, energy, food, feed, fiber, and climate are strongly related to land use and management, such as afforestation. Many of these interactions can compromise security of supplies of food, energy, and water. This nexus is increasingly recognized as critical to effective climate-resilient pathway decision-making. But tools to support local and regional scale assessment and decision support remains at this time very, very limited. We will lower this barrier through our upcoming assessment, 6th assessment. Agriculture and forestry lie at the heart of the efforts to understand and tackle climate change. We believe that contributions of FAO to this effort will be crucial for the success of the aspiration of global climate stabilization. Together, the science and policy communities can address this challenge. Thank you very much.